Hi, Sam. I thought I'd actually pop in tonight and start to read you a book, just like I used to your father and your aunt when they were little, about your age, actually much younger, and up until they were, let's see, your auntie would have been about 12 and your dad would have been about 16. But I used to read to them all the time, and they've never heard this book before. It's called Charlie to the Rescue, and it's by R.M. Ballantyne, an author back in what's called Elizabethan, or no, Victorian time. So Victorian time would have been around the turn of the century, but not this century. This would have been back in around the 1900s. So this book is really old. And you can see in this book here that it was published in New York in 1890. So holy wow, this is an old book. But it is a boy's adventure novel, and I thought it would be great to start reading it to you. So as you can tell, Charlie to the Rescue is definitely going to be about a hero. And Charlie is a young man. And so let's begin. Let's see what we have in here. So, Charlie to the Rescue, a tale of the sea and the Rockies. Chapter 1 introduces the hero. To be generally helpful was one of the chief points in the character of Charlie Brooke. He was evidently born to aid mankind. He began by helping himself to everything in life that seemed at all desirable. This was natural, not selfish. At first, there were few things, apparently, that did seem, to his infant mind, desirable. For his earliest days were marked by a sort of chronic crossness that seemed quite unaccountable in one so healthy. But this was eventually traced to the influence of pins, injudiciously. That kind of means like, not well placed, disposed about the person by nurse. Possibly this experience may have tended to develop a spirit of brave endurance, and might perhaps account for the beautiful modifications of character that were subsequently observed in him. At all events, sweet, patient amiability was the prevailing feature in the boy long before the years of infancy were over. And this heavenly aspect of him was pleasantly diversified in course of time by occasional displays of resolute, we might almost say heroic, self-will, which proved a constant source of mingled pride and alarm to his widowed mother. From a very early period of life, little Charlie manifested an intense desire, purpose, and capacity for what may be called his life work of rescuing human beings from trouble and danger. It became a passion with him as years rolled on, and it was among the chief means that brought about the changes in his checkered career. Apparently enough, he began, almost in babyhood, by rescuing himself. It happened thus. One day, when he had reached the immature age of 5, he was left in the nursery for a few moments in company with a washtub, in which his mother had been cleansing the household linen, means washing the bedding. Mrs. Brooke, it may be remarked, although in the middle ranks of life, she was younger than me, was very much below the middle ranks in financial prosperity. and had therefore to perform much household drudgery, just like me. Charlie's earnest desire to please and obey his mother constantly came into collision with that self-will to which we have referred. Separately, these qualities may perhaps work quietly, at least as regards their possessor. Yeah, that's right. But unitedly, they form a mixture which is apt to become explosive in early youth. "Don't touch the tub, Charlie. I'll be back directly," said Mrs. Brooke as she was leaving the nursery. "Don't even go near it." "No, mother, I won't." He spoke with much decision, for he adored water, not to drink, but to play with, and seemed to realize the danger of his position and the necessity for self-control. The temptation to avail himself of the chance, however, was almost too much for him. I mean, come on, a pool of water. Feeling that an internal conflict was pending, he toddled to the fire, turning his back to it a la patermilias, meaning warming his tushy, and glared at the tub, resolved, come what might, to be dood, meaning good. But fate was against him. Suddenly, he became aware that something more than radiated heat was operating in rear. Oh, that light went off. Let's see if we can get some light back. Okay. Sorry. So essentially, he glanced behind. His cotton tunic was in flames. In a twinkling of an eye, he was seated in the washtub, his hands clasped in horror as he thought of his guilt and the flames thoroughly extinguished. Whew. The solemn glare and pursed mouth with which he met his mother's look of blank amazement may be imagined but cannot be described. He looked so quiet, too, and so evidently contented, for the warm water was congenial, meaning he liked it. Warm water, it felt good. "Oh, Charlie, did I not say that?" "Yes, mother, but I'm burnt." The fearsome and dripping black patch which presented itself to the agonized mother when she lifted him out of the tub sufficiently enlightened her and exonerated the child. But her anxiety was not relieved till she had stripped him naked and ascertained, for certain, that no scrap of his fair skin had been injured. This may be said to have been the real commencement of Charlie Brooke's career. We mention it chiefly to show that our hero was gifted with some power of ready resourcefulness, even in childhood. He was also gifted with a fearless and daring disposition, a quietly enthusiastic spirit, a modest mien, and a strong muscular body. Of course, these admirable qualities were not fully developed in childhood, but the seeds were there. In due time, the plants came up and the flowers bloomed. We would here caution the reader, especially the youthful reader, that's you, I love you, against supposing that from this point our hero was engaged in rescue work and continued at it even after, without intermission. Excuse me. Like Samson, with his great strength, he exercised his powers over he exercised his powers only now and then, more than half unconscious of what was in him. and on many occasions without any definite purpose in view. His first act of heroism was exercised when he had reached the age of 9. That's almost as old as you, I think. At 9 years old, in behalf of a kitten. I love him already. It was on a magnificent summer day, soon after that he had been sent to the village school, that the incident occurred. Charlie was walking at the time with one of his school fellows named Shank Leather. Can you imagine such a name? Shank Leather. Very odd. But, it's fiction. Okay. Shank was a little older than himself and a good enough fellow in his way, but much given to boasting and possessed of very few of the fine qualities that characterized our hero. The two were out for a holiday ramble and long way from home, and had reached a river, on the banks of which they sat down to enjoy their midday meal. Lunch. The meal was simple and carried in their pockets. It consisted of 2 1.5-inch thick slices of bread with 2 huge lumps of cheese to match. I wish this river was nearer home, said Shank Leather as they sat down under a spreading oak to dine. Why? Asked his companion, with a felicitous brevity and straightforwardness which occasionally marked his conversation. Because then I would have a swim in it every day. Can you swim? Asked Charlie, a slight elevation of his eyebrow indicating surprise, not unmingled with admiration, for our hero was a hero worshipper. He could not well have been a hero otherwise. Of course I can swim, returned Shank. That is to say, a little, but I feel sure that I'll be a splendid swimmer someday, like you. Our companion's look of admiration increased. What'll you take to drink? Asked Shank, drawing a large flask from his pocket. Remember, he's 9. In which he had concealed it up to that moment with the express purpose of giving his companion a pleasant surprise. Again, he's 9. Excuse me. It may be well to add that the variety of drinks implied in his question was imaginary. Shank had only 1 flask, but in the exuberance of convivial generosity, he quoted his own father, who was addicted to the bottle. I won't tell you who that's like. What is it? Asked Brooke in curious expectancy. Taste and see. I've heard that before, said his friend, uncorking the flask. Charlie tasted, but did not see, apparently, for he looked solemn, and tasted again. It's licorice water, said Shank with a look of one who expected approval. I made it myself. Admittedly, it sounds like something I'd make. Nauseous in the extreme, it might have served the purpose of an emetic had not the digestion of the boys been ostrich-like. But on hearing how it came into existence, Charlie put it a 3rd time to his lips, took a good gulp, and then, nodding his head as he wiped his mouth with his cuff, declared that it was wonderful. Yes, isn't it? There's not many fellow who could make stuff like that. Bet not. No, indeed, assented the other hastily, as he attacked his bread and cheese. Does your father know you made it? Oh, yes, he tasted it too. He'd taste anything in the shape of drink. But he spat it out and then washed his mouth with brandy and water. Mother took some too, and she said that she tasted worse drinks, and she only wished that Father would take to it. That made Father laugh heartily. Then I gave some to little May, and she said it was so nice. That was like little May, remarked Charlie with quite a laugh. She'd say that a mess of tar and shoe blackening was nice if you made it. But I say, Shank, let's see you swim. I'd give anything if I could swim. Do like a brick as you are. There's a fine deep hole here under the bank. You know, like the beach, but solid like dirt. He pointed to a pool in the river where the gurgling eddies certainly indicated considerable depth of water, but his friend shook his head. No, Charlie, he said, you don't understand the danger as I do. Don't you see that the water runs into the hole at such a rate that there's a tremendous eddy that would sweep any man off his legs? But you're going to swim, you know, interrupted his friend, and have to get off your legs anyhow. Well, that's all you know, returned the other. If a man swept around by an eddy, don't you know he'll be banged against things, and then the water rushes out of the hole at such a gush and goes thundering down below over boulders and stones, and don't you see? That's true, Shank. It does look dangerous, even for a man that can swim. But he put such emphasis on the man that his comrade glanced sharply at him. But the genuine innocence of our hero's face was too obvious to suggest irony. He simply saw that the use of the word man pleased his friend. Therefore, he used it. Conversation was cut short at this point by the sudden appearance on the scene of two strangers, a kitten and a dog. The assertion that dogs delight to bark and bite. Did you get that? The assertion means the phrase or the suggestion that dogs delight to bark and bite is perhaps too sweeping. But then it was made by a poet. And poets have an acknowledged license, though not necessarily a dog license. Certain it is, however, that this dog, a mongrel cur, did bark with savage delight and display all its teeth, that an evident desire to bite as it chased a delirious tortoiseshell kitten towards the river. It was a round, soft, lively kitten, with the hair on its little body sticking straight out, its heart in its mouth, and horror in its lovely eyes. It made straight for the tree under which the dinner was going on. Both boys started up. Enemies in front and rear! Even a human general might have stood appalled. Two courses were still open, right or left. The kitten turned right and went wrong. For that was the riverside. No time for thought. Barking cur and yelling boys, it reached the edge of the pool, spread out all its legs with a caterwaul of despair, and went headlong into the water. Shank Leather gazed, something like glee mingled with his look of consternation. Not so our hero. Pity was bursting his bosom. With one magnificent bound, he went into the pool. Remember, he can't swim. Caught the kitten in his right hand and carried it straight to the bottom. Next moment, he reappeared on the surface, wildly beating the water with one hand and holding the kitten aloft in the other. Shank, to do him justice, plunged into the river up to his waist, but his courage carried him no further. There he stuck, vainly holding out a hand and shouting for help, but no help was near, and it seemed as if the pair of strugglers were doomed to perish. With a pitiful eddy swept them both out into the deep pool, into the foaming rapid below. Shank followed them in howling despair, for here things looked 10 times worse. His comrade, being tossed from billow to breaker, was turned head over heels, bumped against boulders, stranded in shallows, overturned and swept away again, but ever with the left arm beating wildly and the right hand still holding firm with the kitten held high in the air. But the danger, except from being dashed against the boulders, was not really as great as it seemed, for every time that Brooke got a foothold for an instant, or was driven on a rock, or was surged right end up over a shot of water, he managed a little gasp of air, including a great deal of water. The kitten, of course, had the same chances, and being passive, perhaps suffered less. At the foot of the rapid, they were whirled as if contemptuously into an eddy. Shank was there, as deep as he dared venture. He even pushed in up to his armpits, and catching his comrade by the hair, dragged him to the bank. "Oh, Charlie, I saved ye," he explained, as his friend crawled out and sat down. "Aye, and you've saved the kitten, too," replied his friend, examining the poor little animal. "It's dead," said Shank. "Dead as mutton." No, only stunned. No wonder, poor beast. With tender care, the rescuer squeezed the water from the fur of the rescued. Then, pulling open his vest and shirt, he was about to place the kitten in his bosom to warm it. "No use doing that," said Leather. "You're as wet as night and cold as itself." "That's true. Sit down here," returned Brooke, in a tone of command that surprised his comrade. "Open your shirt." Again Shank obeyed, wonderingly. Next moment he gave a gasp as the cold, wet creature was thrust into his warm bosom. "It makes me shiver all over," he said. "Never mind," said his friend coolly, as he got up and wrung the water out of his own garments. "Give it here, then." The creature was indeed showing feeble symptoms of revival. So Brooke, whose bosom was not only recovering its own heat, but was beginning to warm the wet garments, thrust it into his own breast, and the two friends set off homeward at a run. At the nearest house they made inquiry as to the owner of the kitten, but failed to find one. Our hero therefore resolved to carry it all the way home. Long before that haven was reached, however, his clothes were nearly dry, and the rescued one was purring sweetly, like childlike innocence, all the horrors, suffering, and agony of the past forgotten, apparently, and in the enjoyment of the present. Well, that's the end of chapter 1, Sam. I hope you like it, and I'll read another chapter in a couple days or so. Good night. Thanks for listening. Go to bed now. Goodbye.